Hello, everyone. Let's make sure that we've got some folks in the room. We do. I'm sure some are still joining, but we'll go ahead and just start with a few housekeeping items, which you all know already. You've been with us. This is day 3. I'm sure you've seen this slide. If you have any questions, you have issues with your audio, with your browser, put it in chat, throw in a question for me. I'll be behind stage monitoring that. We're really excited to have all of you here today. I'm going to let both Rebecca and Brandon introduce themselves and kick off the session, but just know that we're going to be putting a few more resources in chat for you, as well as, I can hear you. That's okay. We're also going to be doing a Q&A at the end of this session, so make sure to put your questions in the chat, and we're going to tee up a few of the most asked questions in advance so that we've got everything covered. With that, I'll hand it over to Brandon and Rebecca.
All right. Hey, everybody, let's get our slideshow up here. I'm Rebecca Sundquist. You may have seen me a few times around the conference already. And today, Brandon and I are going to be talking about unlocking the potential of Blackbaud CRM with read-only access for our Blackbaud Cloud Operations hosted environments. So a little bit about, if I can figure out how to actually advance the slides. You got it? Someone got it for me. Thank you, Kelly. All right. So I'm a strategic consultant here at Blackbaud. I live in Kansas City, Missouri, speaking to you from my home now. And a little tidbit about me is I cannot say no to a street dog. I have a new puppy that's been with us since I found her in January in the freezing cold.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Hello, everyone. Hopefully, can see some friendly faces out there from the community. Always fantastic to be at BB Dev Days, and always a real pleasure to be on the stage with Rebecca. I am Brandon Winchester. I'm the director of our success engineering team. I am in Charleston, South Carolina. I love coffee, I love technology, and I also really love Rice Krispie treats. So if you ever see me somewhere and you need to bribe me, I will. I have a strong affinity for street dogs as well. But coffee and Rice Krispie treats are never going to get you in.
All right, I found the slide advancing buttons. So today we're going to start out by defining read-only database access and the sister to that, which is read, write, execute access for users in a non-prod environment. We'll define those and then talk about some really key usage scenarios where you're going to get value out of those connections. We have anticipated the most common questions, so hopefully we'll be able to pick up some of those Q&A questions as we answer common questions we've already anticipated, but please do drop your questions into the Q&A because we do hope to have time to address them at the end, and we'll provide some resources for you. I'm not seeing our docs, so that's interesting because we should have a handout here, and if we don't get those docs live during our session today, you should be able to come back when this session is on demand and locate those the download at that time. So let's see. For our as we define read-only and read-write execute access, we're going to walk through the key benefits. What's the difference between read-only, read-write? Where do they apply? And Brandon's going to talk us through how those are secured, and we'll look at how to actually make those connections. So Brandon, would you like to kick us off with some of those key benefits of these tools?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Rebecca. Again, welcome, everyone. So let's talk about what the key benefits of these features are so that we understand what the appeal to us as a collective group of developers are. Why are we interested in these features? Why are these tools ones that have compelling usage for us as a group of developers? So there's a few things. First is performance. We're able to improve the performance by running reports, improve performance by running reports, SQL queries against the read-only node rather than the transactional database's primary node. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we go a little bit further into it. But essentially, what we're able to do today is we're able to essentially load balance database requests between the primary node and the secondary node. Now, that's really important because, of course, the primary node has a lot going on. So any sort of things we can free up, resources we can free up for the primary node allows us to make usage of those resources on other things, of course. And then the secondary node, it does have things going on, but it's obviously the secondary, not the primary node. And so by putting a request, database request that we're able to onto the read-only node, spreads that load across both servers, and it gives us a pretty good performance improvement with essentially no lag. The other thing is that it really enables modern tool sets. So what we mean by that is we're able to incorporate modern, contemporary reporting and data aggregation tools. Those might be Microsoft Fabric, could be Tableau, might be Snowflake out at AWS, Alteryx. There's a whole suite of them. Essentially, any tool that supports an encrypted SQL connection string is a possible solution that we might be able to utilize. So that really broadens our feature sets quite a bit. And the workflow here, by the way, when we talk about incorporating modern reporting and visualization tool sets, the workflow may not necessarily even be a direct connection to that tool set. It may be that we're ingesting data from CRM using the read-only feature into, say, a data lake. And that is where we get the appropriate encrypted SQL connection. And then the data lake connects to that visualization tool. So there are ways we can stack and fold the workflow in various ways that become so much more powerful than before we had these tool sets. Of course, there is the question of access. We're able to connect SQL Server Management Studio and get information on what tables are, functions, maybe some stored procedures, and we can see those things beyond what's just in the CRM query tool, which is also pretty nice. You can also use tools other than SQL Server Management Studio. I, as a developer, initially used SQL Toad a long time ago. For those of you who might be familiar with it, SQL Toad supports this as well. So we get access into the database in a way that we couldn't before. And then, of course, that access allows us to do validation. So we're able to mitigate troubleshooting overhead by running investigative queries directly against the read-only database. So if we're in production, again, we'll talk about this in a little bit. Yeah, they teach SQL Toad, right? I think the O in Toad was Oracle at one point. So we're able to reduce that investigative overhead. We can look into data, and if we've maybe done an import or there's a query or all sorts of stuff, in our production instance, we're able to see what's going on in that database through that read-only tool. And that's a really powerful tool. There's other efficiency uses as well, but it makes it a really efficient tool for troubleshooting investigation. So really, really great across board. All right, so what exactly is this read-only database access? Let's dive into the nitty-gritty here. So first of all, read-only database access. This is it's a read-only replica of production environment. And again, we typically call that, from a very specific sort of technical standpoint, this is the always-on secondary node. And it's maintained in near real time. When we say near real time, the lag can vary a little bit, but it's measured in milliseconds frequently. So we're not talking about, in a practical sense, a significant type of lag. And that also means there's no load added to the production OLTP when we're querying from that secondary load. So it goes back to that question of, one, the secondary node is taking all those requests. That's a good thing. It also relieves the pressure on our primary node. So between those two things together, we're able to get a really good improvement, and again, a load balancing across both of those nodes, which is pretty nice. High performance, it's much faster than OData connections, which is great. It has minimal setup. Again, we'll talk about that in a little bit. And it also includes the data warehouse, by the way. It's not just your OLTP database, it's also your BBDW. It's both of those. We have read-only access to both of those. And the read-only database remains online throughout that data warehouse ETL refresh. So there's a very high degree of redundancy around that, which is also fantastic. And then finally, the read-only database supports custom fields as well. So if you're looking for your USR table, extension tables, etc., you're able to access those as well. All right, so read, write, execute. Now this is important to note. This is available only for the non-production environment. Read-only is your production environment. Production is read-only. Read, write, execute is non-production environments. And of course, the broader scope here, the broader context here for everyone, if you haven't picked up on that, is Blackbaud Cloud Operations. So we're talking about a Blackbaud Cloud Operations, essentially Blackbaud hosted, to be casual about it. This is a Blackbaud Cloud Operations set of features. And for the non-production environments, we are offering read, write, execute access. Now, read, write, execute is performed directly on the non-production database. So this is not going through the secondary node. Again, we're not talking production. This is why we're able to offer it directly against the non-production primary node database. User activity is tracked. So we'll talk about security and best practices here in a moment, but user activity is tracked. And the benefit here is you're able to get updates, inserts, deletes. You can execute stored procedures. You can write those stored procedures. You can author them. You can author functions, triggers, and if you're curious, you can also do load spec. So if your intention is to write a stored procedure and you want to take that stored procedure and you want to put it into a catalog item and then deploy it, well, as you're doing development, you can now use through load spec in Visual Studio. You can use SQL Management Studio to write it. Then you can put it into a catalog item. You can load it, make sure that that's working directly through the user interface, and then finally package that up and deploy it to your production environment. So there's a lot of benefits across the board and all these solutions and how they work together. All right, so let's talk security for a moment. Again, the context here is Blackbaud Cloud Operations. These are features that are available to hosted customers in BCO. And all of these solutions, read-only and read-write execute, of course, all of our solutions, follow industry standard best practices for security. So in the instance of read-only and read-write execute, what we mean by that is that the read-only user ID and password, first, it is a complex password. So that's number one, is a complex password. And it's only visible to the Blackbaud CRM administrators. If they go within CRM, you will see a database read-only link. We'll see what that looks like a little bit later on in the presentation. But that's only accessible to your administrators. For the non-production environments, for read, write, execute, those are IDs that are assigned to named users. Right, so Brandon Winchester would have a specific named user account. That's one of the ways we track that access. Those are named users, and those assigned users, those named users, have access also to their user ID and password on the page, database, read, write, execute, user access. And again, we'll see what that looks like from the UI perspective in a little bit. So that's how we handle passwords. Those passwords are also rotated every 60 days by Blackbaud. If you are an administrator, you of course can request an ad hoc rotation on demand. So that's the way we handle passwords. That follows industry standard best practices. Also, the connection must be from approved IP addresses. We whitelist these IPs by filing a ticket with our Blackbaud support team. They'll go and they'll take what IP address is. They'll send it over. It will be whitelisted. Now, a best practice, of course, would be to, if you've got IP addresses that change frequently, you may want to create a virtual server or an accessible server with, again, appropriate hardening on it, where maybe the whitelist the IP address is static, it's not changing. But we whitelist the IP addresses. We list those, and the connection must be encrypted. That's a really critical point. The connection must be encrypted. if we detect an incoming connection that is not encrypted, we'll actually generate an error message, right? And that's also by design. So we have additional sort of layers of security, again, along with industry best practices. That's how we handle security with this Blackbaud Cloud Operations solution.
Thanks, Brandon. I'll show here a screenshot of what the database read-only information page looks like. So an administrator of the Blackbaud CRM environment can access this under Administration, Tools, and the Database Read-Only Access task. You can see that when you first open the page, the connection strings are hidden for security, but the administrator has the option to expand those connection strings. And here we see the expiration date that Brandon mentioned on the password rotation. The expiration date's 60 days out, but the passwords are scheduled to always rotate on Sunday morning before that expiration. So that's why you see that the actual rotation date is a little bit earlier than this. This is where your administrators would keep track of when those new passwords are coming available to update your connections. And as Brandon mentioned, if Sunday in the early morning hours is not going to work for your organization's scheduled processes, then it would be a Blackbaud support request to adjust each rotation as it's coming up. For the read, write, execute access on non-production, we've got something similar here, but now it is accessible on a named user basis. So you'll be telling us during the original deployment which users need to have access to read, write, and execute against your non-production databases. Those users will then be able to locate from administration tools the credentials for read, write, execute. And I saw the one question earlier, what if you want to add more people later? You can do that through a Blackbaud support request. We're competing for moving things forward here. A quick demo of what this looks like in SQL Server Management Studio, just to prove that it works. You can select star from your constituent table. In the background, you see that happening, and a reminder to choose that option to encrypt the connection. I emphasize that twice because it's the most common help request that I get. It is possible to use external tools, and Brandon talked about some of those benefits when we were talking about the key benefits of read-only. We'll come back and talk some more about Power BI in a moment. So Brandon, why don't you kick us off with some developer usage scenarios?
Absolutely, Rebecca. I love the fact that we're competing over the next button. Is really funny. All right, Rebecca, I'll tell you what, I'll get it this time. So we're
Okay.
All right, thanks, Rebecca. Okay, so a couple of usage scenarios. So this is actually one of my favorites. Read, write, execute access on non-production allows for swift testing and development. This is by design, and this means that as developers who are authoring these artifacts, we're able to go into the database. We're able to create again the stored procedure or the function that we want to do, or maybe the select statement, right? We're able to do it in a way that allows us to access our data in real time securely and in a performant manner, and allows us to do pretty swift testing. We don't have to have a copy locally, which is inefficient and has some risk to it. We're able to get to that real data, and of course, you can envision what the intention usage is here. Is you may have whatever tool it is you're using. In this instance here, it's SQL Server Management Studio, and the actual user interface for CRM up in your browser. And you can obviously switch between the two. You're able to kind of multitask and work in a much more efficient manner. And that's all by design, while also, of course, within the context of Blackbaud Cloud Operations. And then the read-only one is also a fantastic developer tool. It allows you to look at data anomalies, if you need to understand why something is maybe returning an exception in a SQL statement, or something looks off as a result of an import. That's a fantastic tool that allows us to go and look into that and do investigations and understand exactly what is going on with our data in a very direct way, using whatever tool we want in a secure manner. So that by itself becomes a really fantastic and very, very efficient way of working. Now, we also can sort of get into scenarios where we have not just creating artifacts, right? Again, I'm talking about authoring SQL statements or functions, stored procedures, but it's also taking those, right? Frequently, if you're authoring a SQL statement or stored procedure or function, you're kind of you're in a step of a multi-step journey, right? You may be doing a whole series of things, including what could very well be, hopefully, likely will be taking that SQL and putting it into a catalog item, right? That's a very, very common scenario in the Infinity world. And it allows you to go and do some interesting stuff like using load spec to load your catalog items. Now, this is something that a lot of the developers really love. It was a tool, if you've ever heard us talk before, Blackbaud uses the SDK the same way that our customers do. We use the SDK. Our developers use the same SDK tools that we push to our customers. We use those ourselves. So one of the ways, and that's to everyone's advantage, because of course that rising tide lifts all boats. We find something that maybe is inefficient. We want to see more efficiency around it. So a great example of this is the ability to run load spec out of Visual Studio. So you've all probably been there. You've got a catalog item, and maybe you're doing a table or a stored procedure or maybe a data list that you're authoring, and you're sort of fine tuning it, right? You're making some changes. You're seeing how that looks. You're putting that together. Maybe you're changing your SQL a little bit to change performance. Maybe you've got a column you want to manipulate in a certain way. Well, you can use SQL Management Studio or SQL Toad, right? Whatever tool you want to run that SQL. You can take the SQL, you can put it into Visual Studio in your catalog item, and then you can run load spec in Visual Studio and alter and change. You can actually also use Visual Studio, by the way, for some of the SQL work. But again, you have access to all the tools that you want, and you can run and load those catalog items from your entire assembly in Visual Studio up into that database using read, write, execute. Now that's non-production, that's by design, and load spec will support that. Load spec in Visual Studio supports an encrypted connection string. Now there's a little bit of some detail that we'll talk about here when we take a look on this next slide, but that becomes a really powerful tool for developers to build out and work in a very efficient manner. So you can see here, this is just a quick example of a table catalog and how we used our read, write, execute to one of our test environments. And at the bottom, this is part of, as we get the handouts sorted, this is an example of the command line switches, the help switches. We'll see those in another minute. For load spec. Now, Rebecca's mentioned this encryption connection a couple of times. I want to reiterate, when you do your connection string, I've got that connection string, sort of the generic connection string there. I left encrypt equals true out. That is a critical part of that connection string. It actually shows up on the connection string when you go to view it in CRM. But you see how you can put all those components together, and you can actually view all of these values. So it's a very powerful tool to this read, write, execute to be efficient as your developers. As as a developer, you're able to work directly in the tools that you want to use, and then finally build your assembly, build your SDK assembly, and then push that up through Cloud Portal to one of the environments that you're in. So it's a very easy way of doing that. This is a quick example of what load spec looks like. These are some of the command line switches. If you're not aware, there's actually a couple of them. They're quite powerful and pretty useful tools. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some other use cases, some SQL Server integration services packages. This is another really good.
And Brandon, I'll just chime in that we're getting close to our end of time, and I know we've got some valuable questions that have come in, so we might want to go a little quickly through these last bits.
Yep. Thanks for the time check, Rebecca. So SSIS packages are a very powerful way to move and manipulate data. For scenarios where we want to move data between CRM and another tool, right? Maybe that's a data lake that we're pushing information in. SQL Server Integration Services is a solution we can use. It supports a read-only connection string. Again, we're talking read-only here. So it's a very, very powerful one that we can set up on a middleware server that could use our read-only tool in a very performant way to pull data out of CRM and push it to a data lake, another solution. So that's a very, very common, very powerful use case scenario. Really, really common one. We've also got Power BI. Rebecca, I'll let you talk about this a little bit.
Yeah, I love talking about business intelligence. So I'm, third-party tools, whether it's Power BI, Tableau, or elsewhere, anything that allows you to connect to a SQL server will allow you now to connect to read-only or read-write-execute as though they were on-premise. The requirement there, of course, is that the IP address of whatever machine you're connecting from, whether that be locally from a desktop or through a gateway or Tableau bridge, those outbound IPs need to be allow listed for read-only connections. And I do have a slide here to promote a skills lab that is likely full, but if you have that skills lab passed, put this on your on-demand watch list, data modeling for Power BI success, because Gethin James is going to talk very likely about Blackbaud Data Warehouse specifically, which would rely on that read-only connection. And I wanted to emphasize that though I'm talking about these third-party tools, I'm not saying go out into the third party and live there. Those tools the reports from Power BI or Tableau can be displayed inside of Blackbaud CRM. And the University of Houston did a presentation yesterday about doing just that with Power BI. So you can catch that in the on-demand watch list, connecting Blackbaud CRM to Power BI in a hosted environment. And now we'll go through and answer some of the most common questions we get. I know we've also got some questions that have come through live.
Rebecca, I just want to do a time check. We actually have till 15 after, so we can
We
slow
do.
down.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
Take a breath, take a sip. We're
Yes,
good.
we're going to get to all your questions.
Slow down. That sounds great. All right, everybody, take a seat. Let me start the history here. All started years ago.
We can start with the common questions, and then we can jump into more as you put them in chat, in the Q&A, wherever folks are putting them, we see them. So I'm going to call a few out here. First, does read-only access, and you guys can see this on the screen, to OLTP database change guidance on how or when to use Blackbaud Data Warehouse?
Okay, this is a very common question, and it did come up in the University of Houston's presentation. Folks were asking them, are you guys using OLTP now that you have access to that secondary node? It's not putting load on that production database, so we can get direct access to data in near real time. But let's take a step back and think about our purpose and for the reports that we're putting together. The Blackbaud Data Warehouse is developed as an analytical warehouse. So it's on a refresh schedule, likely once an evening. But for your analytical reporting, that refresh should be sufficient. And what that refresh is giving you in value is, your Kimball style of dimension and fact tables ready to relate in a beautiful semantic model in Power BI's tabular data model language there. And so we would still encourage you to use Blackbaud Data Warehouse. Also, it's extensible. The way that the University of Houston representatives responded yesterday was that they have a lot of custom business rules. And so they're able to layer those into either views or into columns that they're putting on to classify different types of data. All of that's in their BBDW and their warehouse ready for reporting. But I'll also mention that when you need that up-to-the-minute information for something transactional, or users need to take action now, so they need to see the most up-to-date data, then a direct query connection to OLTP might be necessary in certain use cases.
All right, so let's maybe take a look at our second common question here. Should read-only access be used to populate an external warehouse? It's a pretty common question. There's no right or wrong answer to this, by the way. A lot of this is very, very situational and dependent. But one thing that doesn't necessarily come up as part of this kind of contemplation is bringing that external data into the data warehouse. Now, there's a lot of advantages to that. You might want to know, well, why would I want to bring some external information into the data warehouse? There are a lot of advantages. The first is Blackbaud Cloud Operations in the Infinity framework. We have a very high uptime. We have software as a service. We have low maintenance. We have high accessibility. So instead of taking CRM data out and putting it somewhere else, you might want to consider, right? And again, there's a lot of factors that need to come into play here, but don't discount bringing that data in to Blackbaud CRM and passing it through and over to the data warehouse. What you get is a pretty significant amount of advantages around that from a very practical sense. So if you're not aware, there is a mart key attribute you can put into many of our catalog specs. So that might be a query, it might be a data list, it could be an export. So you're essentially using the Infinity framework, the CRM framework, to build out APIs on top of your external data, and then you're hosting it with Blackbaud. So you get all the power of that framework with your other data, and essentially you get one central location in the cloud with Blackbaud uptime and dependability as a part of your reporting mechanism. So it becomes a really powerful tool to consider bringing all that into CRM. There's some advantages to that. So that doesn't necessarily mean there are scenarios where using read-only to populate something external isn't a totally fine and also good solution. Again, there's just a lot of situations on some of this. Sometimes the external data doesn't fit well, or it has high volume or changes frequently. Maybe it's got a it's not necessarily the data may not necessarily be worth kind of pulling it in. It's better to kind of pull CRM out, but don't discount the idea of pulling that data in as well. Right? Again, there's no right or wrong answer to it. Either scenario, just dependent on a lot of other factors, could be totally appropriate. All right, so let's also take a look at migrating from on-premise. This is another really common question, and then we'll take a look at questions out in chat. I see we've got a couple over there. So what if you're migrating from on-premise? Well, if you're migrating from on-premise, then again, there's a few things to consider. One is when you're moving from on-premise or not Blackbaud Cloud Operations, you may have processes external that can execute store procedures against your production database. The read-only connection, I have a couple people in chat sort of thinking, why can't I get to a store procedure or a function? It is a very strict interpretation of read-only. That's by design. Does not allow for executing store procedures or functions. So we have to consider taking those things and breaking them down into their individual constituent, not constituent with an uppercase C, constituent parts, and getting the raw SQL from there. That's, again, not necessarily uncommon. It also may be scenarios where a direct connection to the database has just been existent, and the read-only solution is a really great way of replacing that, right? It's just using, again, maybe we've got ingestion into a data lake somewhere, and it's pulling that in. Read-only is probably the consideration for how to put that into place. And of course, if any of you have ever heard me personally speak before, you'll know a lot of things sort of circle back to the Blackbaud Software Development Kit, the SDK, to build these processes within CRM as well. We use those same tools. We use the SDK here at Blackbaud. So it's also a really, it's a good way of kind of considering all these tool sets together. All right, Rebecca, you want to talk a little bit about maybe some, well, actually, I'll tell you what, Rebecca, why don't we go to some questions out in the audience before our resources?
Well, this is our last slide. The links are in the docs. Kelly dropped these links into the beginning of the chat, but I don't know how easy it is to get back to that. So just these are docs to the user guides, or links to the user guides. But yeah, let's address some of these questions that have been sitting in the Q&A for a little bit. Stephanie asked, do you allow open query calls or remote and distributed queries from external servers?
It's a really good question, Stephanie. It's actually a fairly common one. So in production, our production SQL Server node will not have awareness of what other instances are. So the way to sort of think of it is maybe flip it a little bit, which is our SQL Server instance in Blackbaud Cloud Operations is not going to have awareness of other SQL Server instances. It's specific to Blackbaud CRM, but if you have another SQL Server instance somewhere else, it might be able to reach through read-only connection, and you may have a linked server, you may have another way of kind of building up that ODBC connection in this other SQL Server instance, and it accesses CRM, right? It pulls the data in. That's probably the right way to sort of flip it a little bit. So I think it's probably, there are methods to get conjoined reporting. It might be doing something like that, where you sort of reverse it a little bit, look on the other side, or bring that data in, or maybe move both of those to a shared reporting element somewhere. But our SQL Server instances are not going to have awareness of some SQL Server instance outside of our environment.
Mhm.
Let's see, we've got a
Stephanie also asked how often test training staging environments are updated. So Stephanie, I'd point you to the cloud portal that's available when you're hosted with Blackbaud Cloud Operations, where you have control over determining when you're making those copies.
Yeah, good call, Rebecca, great call. Let's see, Sujan asked, best practice for ingesting read-only database to Microsoft Fabric. Rebecca?
Ooh, okay, yeah, that one's a fun one. So I've had a couple of clients coming at it from a couple different directions just this week, right? So in Fabric, you can create a data pipeline. You can start with a copy activity that's leveraging the read-only connection through SQL Server and copying a table to a lakehouse table. That is one option. Of course, you've got to have your gateway set up with its IP allow listed to make that work. So we've seen success starting there. And then I had another client that had a little bit more of a stumble as they were trying to use Fabric's data flow Gen 2. And so they're just starting with that task, not necessarily inside a pipeline, just saying create new data flow Gen 2. But as they were going through creating the connection for the first time, Fabric wasn't consistently presenting the option to encrypt the connection. So they had a little bit of trouble there, and they actually found they had to create a semantic model, a basic connection in Power BI Desktop first, upload that, then get the connection related to their gateway. And after that point, they were able to leverage that connection in additional data flows. All right, so there are options out there, and it's a whole new world.
I like that. It's good call out there, Rebecca. So I think related to that, Lawan asked this question, which is it best practice to deploy SQL Server reporting services, SSRS, to BBCRM itself, or keep the reporting component housed in a separate reporting BI tool outside of CRM? So it's a good question. Rebecca, you want to chime in? I've got some thoughts on it, but something you want to chime in on that first? Part of my thinking is, Lawan, part of the reason I like this is I bet Rebecca's going to think SQL Server reporting services. Is there a better option?
And I think that Lawan and I might have talked about this a little bit in the past as well. So SQL Server reporting services is aging, right? And Power BI's report builder is essentially the next gen tool for that's the new equivalent of SQL Server reporting services. So if you are already a Power BI shop and you've got Power BI reports going over there, now you need to introduce paginated reports. I would encourage you to go ahead and leverage that Power BI report builder. But and I'll mention that you can still embed those in Blackbaud CRM in the same way that I showed a screenshot earlier of a standard Power BI report. But as much as there's also that benefit of having things just native in Blackbaud CRM, and so SSRS reporting is certainly still an option there. Traditionally those connections are hitting your actual production OLTP and BBDW.
Yeah, it's a good perspective. Lawan, the other sort of angle on this, in addition to totally support everything Rebecca said, I support everything Rebecca says. It's a general rule. Plus one to everything she said. The other thing to consider is, what is a report, right? In kind of today's world, and there are scenarios where you, instead of doing reporting services, you may find getting information, right, getting data into the hands of your end users. Could also be a data list or a list builder from a query, right? That could also be another way of sort of looking at it. In addition to everything Rebecca said. Now, that said, if there are scenarios where maybe you've got a very traditional kind of report that maybe needs to be printed out, there are still some scenarios where customers print out reports and they hand them out to board members, or some other scenario. Right? Those do exist, where you might say, okay, maybe this is a good call for a very traditional type of simplistic SSRS report where I need to have it accessible within CRM, and maybe I want to print it. It handles printing. I think still handles printing quite well versus your more complex visualizations. Maybe you don't need a lot of analysis on it. If those come up, you sort of work through a little bit of the kind of use cases there, and it comes up. I think it's okay to still use it, but I think Rebecca's probably got there. Sounds like you, Rebecca, have got the ideal kind of conversation, which is, we probably should be thinking about something more contemporary, more powerful first, especially if we've already invested in something else. I think that makes the most sense for sure. All right. See if we have any other questions. Oh, maybe.
Yeah, and Kelly, if you haven't launched the survey yet, this might be a fine time. Yep. I'm so glad that we had the extra 15 minutes. I didn't realize. I thought I shortchanged us. So good.
That's a really, really good point, Stephanie, as well. It's a good one there that, going outside of the reporting services needs might have some efficiency in terms of like getting stuff right away. I think you're also probably correct. And that's one of the advantages, by the way, also to that read-only component, which is sometimes you just need a quick answer, right? And you just need to be able to just kind of get it quickly and get, maybe a very immediate kind of conversation going. And you're able to do that, I think, a little bit faster with this tool. Again, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer to any of these. In fact, I guess, Rebecca, is it fair to say they're all right, maybe? They're all.
It depends.
Right.
Classic, right?
Right. It's sort of there's a lot of use cases here, and all these tools have their place. And sometimes it may be a couple of them, right? It's just like we said, getting data in versus getting data out. There's benefits and trade-offs to each one of those, just depending on a lot of other things. Great. Okay. Any other Q&A or any other questions? All right, well, I'll just kind of give a quick plug here for the user guides. These are fantastic, very, very useful, fantastic resources. I'll brag a little bit and say that I know Rebecca's had her eyes on a lot of these, so they've been sort of thoroughly vetted out, really fantastic resources across the board. And want to thank everyone for, appreciate that. Thanks everyone for being here at BB Dev Days. Fantastic.
Thank you for your questions and for your participation.
Great questions, really good questions. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's ping to our last slide here.
Just hanging out in case anyone else wanted to pop any last second. I forgot to ask. All right, guys. Well, you can catch me on the Blackbaud community if you have additional questions after the session.
Absolutely. All right, wonderful. Thanks, everyone. Kelly, I think we're good on our final plumbing, right?
All right. See you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.